Welcome to today's webinar, Future of Tech for Charities. This webinar is organized by Law Society Pro Bono Services. My name is Serene, and I'm your host for this webinar. Before we kick off, some housekeeping matters. Today, we'll be using some different tech from normal. We will be using Pigeonhole Live for our Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and also upvote on any questions that may be of interest. If you have a smartphone or tablet with you, just launch your internet browser and enter www.pigeonhole.at into the address bar. Next, key in our event passcode, which is Future Tech, as shown on the slide. Alternatively, you can click on the link shared in the chat function to launch Pigeonhole Live on your device. If you're viewing this webinar on your desktop or laptop, you should receive an invitation to launch Pigeonhole. Kindly note that today's discussion and materials do not substitute any form of professional legal advice. If you require specific legal advice, please consult a lawyer. With that, I would like to introduce today's panel of speakers. Eugene Ho is a partner in Allen & Gledhill's technology and corporate IP practice and the co-head of its cybersecurity and data protection practice. Huilin Loh is the contracting effectiveness lead for Southeast Asia. She started her career at Accenture as a deal lawyer in Hong Kong and has now taken on the contracting effectiveness lead role for Southeast Asia. In this role, she's focused on enabling the client contracting legal team to excel in supporting the business on client-facing deals. Melissa Koh is the Market Unit Legal Director and Contracting Lead for Southeast Asia. She's been with Accenture for more than 10 years and has held various portfolios in that time, including a 3-year stint in Hong Kong to grow the Greater China and Hong Kong legal team. Melissa is passionate about learning about new technology, and the growth of Accenture services continues to keep her engaged constantly to learn new things. Thank you, Eugene, Huilin, and Melissa for joining us today. Our panelists from Accenture Legal will first present their legal transformation journey and how they leverage technology to address some of the challenges they face in their legal team. Thereafter, we'll walk through the case scenario for today. Melissa?
Thank you very much, Serene. So maybe let me just begin with our Accenture legal transformation journey with a bit of context as to what we do in Accenture. So we are a leading technology company focusing on SI, system implementation, transformation, including digital transformation as well for clients. So our legal team is actually very big. We are, our contracting team supports the Accenture sales and delivery business. When they sell projects to clients, we are actually the ones that close and support the contracts that drive the projects. So our team is actually, it's supporting, we're handling actually a large volume of contracts every day. And also, I think in terms of the documentation that our team supports, so that's obviously very high in volume. And so with that as well, with the business constantly increasing during the COVID period, there was massive transformation, digital transformation in many of our clients. As a result, right, our legal team is actually constantly trying to support an increasing volume of work. And at the same time, clearly it is difficult. Resourcing is always an issue, be it due to attrition or be it trying to grow our legal team to constantly match up with the volume of work that we are supporting in terms of the business. So I think with that climate, there's this struggle, obviously, to keep pace. And with the speed of digitization as well, you know, the technology is constantly always growing really fast. We also find that our teams are also struggling to keep up with the pace in terms of the rapidness in which our contracts need to be closed to keep pace with the competition as well. So I think with all that, it sets really some of the problem statements that we are facing as a result. And also because we're handling and supporting such a high volume of contracts, there's also a huge wealth of data that we're handling. And one of the key issues that crosses all our minds is how do we then intelligently harness the data, because we are actually accessing and supporting so much of the contracts as part of our day-to-day lives. So I think setting with that context in mind, right, and us being also a leading technology provider, we're also at the forefront to be able to see how exactly we should be leveraging our technology to better support the business. And I think so. So I think this part of what we're trying to present today is to showcase a little bit about our legal journey, our technology journey, as you know, we have actually put in place certain legal transformational tools in terms of a what we call a case management system that actually tracks, you know, right from the start of which a deal originates, and as it progresses into the contracts, we actually have this tool to help support that. And after the contract is signed, we actually progress as the deal moves into delivery as well. So if you can just move the slides as well. Next. Yeah. So so I think my colleague later on, Huilin, she'll talk a little bit about this case management tool that we're using. And I think one of the biggest driver for this tool, as we would explain later, is we hope that, I mean, obviously it helps us with archival. It also helps us when, you know, there is attrition. And in the past, right, a lot of times the knowledge resides in the minds of the people. And so when people actually leave the firm, we actually have a potential knowledge drain. So, but with this technology, we're actually able to retain the knowledge within the company, and also I think make better use of the data. And we'll talk a little bit about the data analytics behind it, how we're able to leverage the data that we obtain from the contracts, and also because it's part of our what we call risk escalation process, where we're able to capture the key risks on this data platform. And we're able to then facilitate the business in making better, smarter decisions with regards to the risk, you know, and enabling us to actually support the business better. So that's the benefit of the technology that we have been deploying to the legal team. And on top of that, also, I think the technology has been very useful to help us solve various problems. We have, Huilin will talk a little bit about this Code of Business Conduct bot, where it's been used to help answer questions. We also have legal technology in the space of a very powerful search engine. And it was really interesting because we've actually used the search engine to help us with the search of, you know, contractual terms, especially during the COVID situation, where a lot of our projects had to rotate into from an on-site premise into a virtual one, and how we needed to search through contracts to check through our obligations. And the tool enabled us to, you know, instead of combing through physically thousands and thousands of contracts, we're able to get to a very quick review of our contract database very quickly. So I think that was how technology was also very useful in that space. And then so and also I think part of this, I was talking a little bit about the case management tool. This is a tool that also interfaces with our business team's tools. And so we're able to cut short quite a bit of data entry because it populates, you know, a lot of the business data into the tool and enables our team to be able to open up, you know, individual cases, or in terms of, in our case, it would be contracts. And we track the life cycle of that contract as well, from start to the end. And what it also does is enable us, hopefully at the end of the day, to be able to manage the timelines. We're able to track how quickly we're able to close contracts. And obviously with that, we're able to try and see where the weak points are, what we should be doing smarter to be able to accelerate contract closure as well. So again, this is the use of technology to be able to drive better business outcomes. And we'll talk more about the technology. So maybe I'll hand over to Huilin to speak a bit more about the tools that I was mentioning on a high level.
Right. Thanks, Melissa.
Mm.
So I think we can go to the next slide. Right. I think this is a little bit of context that we shared a little bit earlier on. So we can move on to, I think, to the next slide as well. Right. Yep. So I think Mel has shared quite a little bit about the different tools that we have. And in fact, we still seek to improve actually all the available tools that we have, just to make sure that we cover all bases in our legal tech journey. As you can see, we definitely try to leverage a lot of the digital platforms to even do archiving. And with that, we do have then the necessary data sets to actually run a little bit of our analytics. Of course, trying it out in little increments and making small improvements from there. I think we can go to the next slide. Yep. So I think this slide actually gives a pretty good overview of how we actually seek to harmonize all the disparate platforms that our firm was using previously. So across, when we first started looking at the digital journey, we realized obviously that all the different, functions were using different platforms and software. So in order to, ensure that, all the different softwares and data could be sort of pulled together, we had to make sure, all the different platforms were integrated. So we started from a design of, an end-to-end life cycle. I mean, starting for our team, it's the contracting team. So we obviously had to start with where the business first raises a request. And from there, it then feeds into our end-to-end contract lifecycle platform for, allocation to the relevant legal professionals to pick up. And then we're able to also, run the edits and track the contract to signatures, send it out for digital signatures as well. And even after, closing the contracts, there's the optionality of, archiving and then running contract analytics. And of course, with paperwork, we have things like MSAs and contract families. So we do try to, ensure that that's all sort of stored properly so that everybody, is on the same page about, what the documentation is for a particular client. And therefore we sort of get a very good end-to-end view of what needs to be done and the health of, client account. Next. Yeah. So I think apart from the end-to-end life cycle, I think there are some ancillary tools that, of course, we try to leverage to ensure that it's a seamless support that we give to our business folks. So on top of that, some of the initial tools that they interface with, of course, NDAs to protect confidentiality of discussions. We do try to make that seamless as well. We allow the business folks to be self-enabled to run their own NDA reviews. And of course, automatic generation of NDAs as well. So that actually also alleviates, the need for our legal professionals to, come on board for such simple documents. And we're trying to go further a little bit with that, with proposal bots and self-SOWs for just simple.
I think the aim of it all is to allow the more menial, simple tasks to be done, to be automated, and then allowing our legal teams to actually do the more complex matters, actually. And that drives engagement as well.
Yeah, next slide, please. Yep. So this is a slide which gives us a closer look at some of the functionalities that we still working on improving within our platform. So we really try to maximize all the functions that we can, and so it's still we're still in our journey to digitalize the whole life cycle. Thanks. And of course, talking about the health of a client, project as well. This platform actually, seeks to give, the relevant stakeholders on a deal, a quick bird's eye view as well about the contractual health of a account. And of course, this could be, useful for any project specifically. It gives you different functionalities for looking at different aspects of a project, right? Because most projects, they have different phases, different timelines, different stakeholders running different work streams as well. And basically, I mean, with our teams, I mean, we're not all in the same location as well. So we do work across borders, across time zones, and having this kind of a digital platform actually sort of enables collaboration more seamlessly, because then you get the necessary updates into the platform. Your other project stakeholders can check in, when they have time, and it keeps everyone accountable as well. Yeah, next. Right. So this is our main platform that we have for our digital contract archiving and analytics. The good thing about it is that it also has translation capabilities as well as advanced search. So a lot of times when we're working cross-border, some of the regions, they do have local language requirements. And in the past, it was very difficult, for us to be able to spend time and, spend fees on external translators as well to translate documents, especially when there's a time pressure on the client deals. So with this in-house capability, actually, we're much more efficient in terms of getting the necessary information faster to do a turnaround, and then sort of, at least you have a sort of a substantially accurate translation, not 100%, of course, but, substantially accurate to just understand the gist of what the contract is and then to follow up from there. Yes, so this is just a mock-up of, how it's easy for our business folks to sort of, review contract NDAs on the go as well. So therefore it, really, cuts down the time for them to sort of engage, with us, via emails and calls. So as long as they, have it ready, that's something that they can use at their own end. And this is the chatbot that Mel was mentioning earlier. So I think with the business folks, the information flow is always something that they find difficult to have on hand, and having a chatbot where you can just sort of pose a very easy question, and then have the chatbot come back to you with a very simple answer or a link to go look for additional information. It's very useful for them on the go as well.
And it also frees up our people from
Yeah.
constantly having to repeat the same answers to all the different questions that the business poses to the legal team. Yeah.
Right. And of course, I think having that worked out well for us, I mean, we're looking at adding a lot of different bots that we can experiment with, where we can sort of automate the workflow process and just make things easier for people to get on with what they need to find and know. Yeah, so that's all for Accenture.
Thank you, Melissa and Huilin. That's very insightful, because it's not very common where you have the opportunity to hear the internal processes and technology of other companies. And I believe for, all of the different charities, you may be at very different stages in terms of your tech journey. In our case now today, we're going to start from ground zero. We're going to follow the journey of Chris as he deals with the growing pains of a charity and how perhaps technology may help. So Chris is the operations manager of Food Charity. Food Charity has volunteers helping to buy, cook, and deliver food to its beneficiaries. All of Food Charity's paperwork, including beneficiary forms, volunteer forms, and supply agreements, are physical hard copies. Chris finds that he is running out of space to keep physical documents. A board member suggests that he throws away all the physical documents and keeps scanned copies instead. So Eugene, are there any legal considerations that a charity could consider before they start throwing away all their physical documents?
Yeah, so I mean, Singapore law, I mean, we're generally very supportive for people going electronic. So yes, please consider going electronic. But some things you need to think of at a high level. I mean, first thing is, why are you keeping them? So there's probably a reason. So there are certain requirements under law where you need to keep certain types of documents, say employment documents, CPF statements. So that is the reason why you need to keep. So with that in mind, that will flow into the next step of your digitalization policy. Why do I need to keep them and how do I keep them? So the how, I mean, is something that Singapore legislation is very permissive. We have this legislation called the ETA, Electronic Transactions Act. So the general rule is that if the law requires you to keep certain documents, electronic copies generally be okay, provided you meet certain requirements. For example, things like, the document's accessible, it reads the same way as the hard copy. But there's certain types of documents where, it's a bit iffy. So if you deal with things like, say, wills, contracts to sell property, houses, maybe a bit tricky to keep, to move to wholly electronic versions, but something to think about. Another thing to think about is evidentiary admissibility. So we have the Evidence Act that governs admission of documents, documentation as evidence. So there are certain presumptions that supports electronic evidence. So when you design your own, electronic retention kind of system, something to take note of. So one of the rules is that if it is kept, the electronic copy is generated by a third party who has nothing to do with the case, then the court will presume that, okay, it's authentic. Of course, there are certain things to think about, and the court has very, very wide discretion to decide at the relevant time. Yep.
Thanks, Eugene. That's helpful. How long typically must charities keep documents for? Is there any certain guidelines that the legislation has?
Okay, so a very lawyer answer will be it depends. Okay, it really depends. Okay, I'm not saying this just to,
Sure.
So it depends on types of documentation. The law prescribes a certain retention timeline. So again, that goes back to the first point, what you must think of, why you keep them, right?
Yes.
So first thing is, if the law requires you to keep, you have to keep. And you just follow whatever the law tells you to keep. So if the law doesn't require you to keep, what is a best practice timeline? So typically you recommend 6 years, 7 years. And then the reason is that 6 years is the limitation period for or for normal kind of stuff. So generally people keep 6, or if you see 7 is a big yasu, they'll +1.
Thanks, Eugene. I think it's helpful to keep in mind that even if the law doesn't state a minimum time period, but if you have touch wood, any claims, it's good to keep it for at least 6-7 years in case you need the documents. In any event, you switch to digital, it's quite easy to keep your digital copy. So Huilin, how does Accenture deal with the storage of documents?
Right. Thanks for that question. So I think for Accenture, we actually have moved away from dealing with physical documents, especially I think in most of the markets in our region, electronic signatures are recognized. So a lot of times we are dealing with digital documents, and we've also, because we work across borders and time zones, we've actually moved most of our collaboration documents into the cloud. So we don't deal actually with physical documents. It's all digital documents signed digitally, and we save them in the cloud as well. So that it makes it much easier for us.
Thanks, Huilin. Touching on storage of legal documents, can anyone save the documents to the cloud? Can anyone access it? Is there a particular person who's in charge of saving the documents?
No, not particularly. Of course, the legal team does, take the first step in saving it. But all our cloud storage is all, it's filed by project team, so there's a certain confidentiality to that. And in terms of, accessing the legal documents, that's only open to the legal team. So it's not open to the whole firm.
Thanks, Huilin. And I think that's something important to consider. in terms of accessibility of the storage of the documents, as well as who is responsible. Because if you start on this drive and no one's responsible, possibility nothing's going to get saved, especially when the charity is so used to hard copies. So moving on to the next limb of the scenario, Chris finds it time consuming to arrange for documents to be signed in person. A volunteer suggests to Chris that he should get electronic signatures instead of physical signatures. Eugene, I think as a starting point, what is an electronic signature? I mean, must you use a special program, or is it just copy and paste a picture of the signature?
So we fall back to first principles. What does a signature mean? So a signature, I mean, generally means that is someone to get identify you, and it gives tell people that look, I agree, or I agree to the documentation I put my signature on. So generally, I mean, if you something that identifies you, it could be whatever you sign. I mean, if you think that you draw a turtle and it looks like you, I mean, that's generally fine as well. So I think the tricky part is when you transcend to the digital medium, the question is, what is a digital and electronic signature? So it's the same principle. It must be a method which is able to identify you and also indicate that, hey, I'm the person who actually signs it. So it deals with identity risk. So the rule under the ETA, which is very, very helpful. You should always look at the ETA when you go digital, is that it must be a method which is used to identify the person and indicate your intention. And the method must be reasonable in the circumstances. So DocuSign and all that, I mean, generally, okay, there's some processes in place. If you use DocuSign and you have some processes, I think that's generally okay. But the question, if you're thinking, oh, if I use DocuSign means everything is okay, maybe not, because it really depends on the circumstances and how you put things in place. There are also certain types of documents that your ETA doesn't support. If things like, say, wills, buying and selling of houses, if you're doing that, your ETA doesn't help you. You have to look at certain procedural requirements that is under the relevant statute. So that's something that you need to be more mindful of if you're doing that sort of stuff.
Thanks, Eugene. And such an important reminder that I think, especially with COVID situation, I think most of us have gone to, I think, electronic signatures. So it's useful to take note of what Eugene has said, that not all documents can be signed electronically. On top of that, in terms of corporate governance, you might need to figure out how do you check that that person has signed a document and it's not a random third party. So Melissa, what is Accenture's approach towards signatures?
So I think we have gone on board with the digital or electronic signatures several years back already, and it's proven to be really timely and helpful, especially during COVID. But even before that, because our firm is 700,000 wide, right? And people are all over the place. A lot of times the authorized signatories are actually could be traveling overseas. And so getting physical signatures is always a challenge. And so we have actually rotated to using electronic signatures several years back. One of the key things that we advised the business when we rotated to that model was really to be able to keep a proper audit trail, which we think is important because to Eugene's point earlier, it's important to authenticate whether or not the signature belongs to the right person and he is the right person who's should be signing the document. So I think we stress very much to the business that, when we put in place electronic signature approaches, there needs to be proper audit trail as to who's consenting, who's authorized to sign, read through the document, and before the signature is affixed to the document. Because a lot of times, like even when they come to me for signatures, or I outsource it to my secretary, but I'm actually, there's an audit trail to say that I've reviewed the document and I consent to it. So I think we have that rigor, which is important because in the event of dispute, obviously, we want to make sure that all the paper trail is in place.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. We have a question from the audience. Electronic signatures, is it okay if we just insert the signature or perhaps even just use your mouse and draw on it instead of using an app or program? Eugene, what are your thoughts?
I mean, as Melissa mentioned, it really goes back to your risk acceptance. I mean, how comfortable do you feel and how do you assess the risk? So the advantage of, I guess, using an app, say DocuSign, is that there are certain processes in place that you can leverage on. And that will help you to deal with this thing called identity risk. That means you need to be, the person has to be the person who is said to be on the signing block, you see. Putting a signature in, I mean, that's okay if you are comfortable with the risk that there may be disputes down the road and potential issues. I think you're comfortable with the issues. And if it's a low value, low risk kind of arrangement, sure. And of course, I think another thing to think about is your internal processes as well. So certain companies, I mean, there's certain internal processes in place that you sign electronically, but you can say through DocuSign. And it is the version of DocuSign which the company has purchased. So there may be additional frills that you see that will help you authenticate and try to ensure that, the identity of the person is indeed a person. So they have those things in place. You have to pay more for those. I mean, that's why it's value added. So with that, I mean, that tries to reduce the risk, and certain companies feel comfortable that, okay, we go digital, but we need to have a more robust digital system in place.
Thanks, Eugene. I mean, I imagine perhaps, when you first start to go digital signatures, perhaps the most, I guess, cost efficient way is they want to try doing it, drawing perhaps the signatures as opposed to buying a program first. Let's move on to our next scenario. So Food Charity grew from 5 core volunteers to 20 core volunteers and over 120 seasonal volunteers, and from 20 beneficiaries to over 500 beneficiaries. As there is a high turnover of volunteers, Chris finds it challenging to find time to sit down with each volunteer to brief them of Food Charity, what they need to do, and to sign volunteer forms. Huilin, do you have any thoughts on how Chris may use technology to help with this?
Sure. I mean, based on the scenario, it does sound as if Chris is a little bit overwhelmed. It just, having one person to sort of meet with everyone. So I think definitely he needs to maybe consider how to digitalize and, sort of enshrine some of his basic processes. And because, if he's sort of signing up individual volunteers, then in fact, maybe he might want to think about having a website done up with the FAQs on how to, orientate for the volunteers themselves to orientate themselves, right? And sort of like maybe a regular schedule around sort of the more initial volunteer activities. So I think he definitely needs to consider sort of getting a sort of a software platform and maybe digitalizing some of the initial templates for the volunteers onboarding.
Thanks, Huilin. You touched on precedents or on templates. Any tips in terms of how do you figure out or how do you even start creating templates? I mean, do you first study what the business or what the charity often needs before you figure out what templates you set? Any tips on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think you probably need to sort of understand the initial information that you need from the volunteers, and then sort of figure out, what is the most efficient way of just sort of organizing that information and sort of thinking a little bit ahead as to, how long you need that information for as well. So that you don't keep, unnecessary information for too long too.
Thanks. I think when it comes to perhaps templates, is it something that's very driven by the legal department, or do you have to work closely with other departments as well?
I think definitely the business.
Yeah, so I think on that point, right, we work closely, obviously, because a legal template is not just comprising of a set of legal terms. It really captures, the commercial terms as well. And we work closely with finance, tax, to be able to ensure that the template covers all the key details that's needed. And it really depends on what exactly you're trying to drive, like what Huilin was trying to say, what you're trying to address, and what risk actually you're trying to protect from. So I think with all that in mind, then we come up with a template that works for our business, and obviously in your case, probably for the charity as well, what you're trying to protect against, what risk you're trying to cover, and the different scenarios that would address that. Yeah.
Thanks, Melissa and Huilin. Eugene, are there any particular legal concerns for such proposals?
I think it's a mixture of concerns. I'm sorry to be a professional web blanket here again.
No worries.
Yeah, so Also on the legal and also process side.
Mm.
So one very important thing that we're harping on with transactions going electronic is the identity risk. You need to know who you're contracting with. And in this case, you need to know the guy who is volunteering is indeed the person. So give an example. I mean, if I sign electronically and I create the Gmail account, Serene Gan 9999, just add the number of nines, you'll probably get an account.
Yes.
And you sign up and say, I'm Serene and I sign up to your platform. And I become a volunteer and you come, okay, Serene will come tomorrow because Serene says she would. Tomorrow, nobody turns up, you call the person and Serene's like, so who are you? So things like that, I mean, they do happen and they have a potential to happen because this is the risk of going up on an electronic platform. So I guess the question to think about is really how to deal with this and what is your risk appetite, in dealing with this. So if you consider a range of scenarios, say you have a high risk sector, say you're a bank, right? You sign up banking customers, all of them sign hard copies. So bank opening forms, most of them are hard copy because it is a high value kind of transactions and that's high risk. Versus stuff that you see on the brochureware kind of thing on the website, in terms of use, nobody reads, you just click and go. So those maybe low risk, small ticket items, you're comfortable to accept it. High risk, high value, it's harder to accept a pure electronic risk. So this is where I think businesses, charities like yourselves, you need to think like, okay, where do I stand? What kind of documents I need to do? And what is my comfort level in doing this electronically? Yeah.
Thanks, Eugene. And I think that's such an important point to remember that while it's convenient to use electronic means, you also do have to consider as well, the counterparty, whether you need to know them a little bit better, especially if it's dealing with transactions, perhaps involving money, because it is the public's or the charity's money. So the next part is Chris suggests for a web page to be created for their beneficiaries to complete the forms, read about the process, and Q&As. A board member is concerned about the loss of human touch and what happens if there is a cybersecurity attack. Eugene, so what are your thoughts? Do you think a charity has any responsibility if there's a cybersecurity attack on their digital platform?
So the answer is probably yes. Again, there's a lot of scenarios which is dependent on personal data. So charities like yourself, you deal with a lot of personal data, your volunteers, your beneficiaries, a lot of them are individuals. You collect a huge amount of personal data. And you probably heard of the PDPA, so we need to comply with the PDPA, certain requirements, you have to put some policies in place. And one of the things you need to do now, since February last year, is that if there is a data breach relating to personal data, you will need to conduct an assessment to see whether you need to notify the PEPC. So the rule is that it's notifiable if it's a significant harm or it's a significant scale. So 500 and above is significant scale. Once you hit the threshold, you need to notify the PEPC within 3 working days. Sorry, 3 days, not 3 working days, 3 days. So with that, and also you need to think of things like, reasonable security requirements. Do I have reasonable security requirements relating to my personal data? Of course, the more personal data you have, the higher the risk threshold. Also another thing to think about is, do I need to report to the police? Some cases, the answer is yes. So say in a ransomware attack, your servers are locked and the guy said, hey, can you pay me like 10 Bitcoin? If not, I will delete or I'll release to the public. So it's a form of extortion and there is requirement under CPC to report this kind of things. Yeah.
Thanks, Eugene. And I think that's something important to think about, especially for charities and maybe you have a revolving slate of volunteers. So have a think about who's able to access such data and whether you need to protect it. And perhaps over, because I myself have been involved in volunteer work, sometimes, when you email back and forth certain personal data, maybe you consider password locking the documents which contain such personal data. So Melissa, did you have to consider any concerns about the loss of human touch, as mentioned by the board member, because everything's electronic?
Well, I think this is how we look at it, especially within our company. We actually design technology that's human-centric. So we put human at the center of all our designs. And what we mean by that is we do not feel that technology will replace the human, but it actually enhances the experience by combining human with the technology. So what it also means is that actually the technology helps to remove the more menial, more repetitive portions of the work. And actually, by doing so, it frees up time for the human or the team members to actually do more complex, uh, you know, things that is actually providing more value, in our case, to our business stakeholders or to our end customers. So I don't feel that actually, to your point of it actually losing the human touch, we're actually sort of apportioning the work in a different sense, and we can actually get a lot more efficient, be more accurate with the use of technology. And also, I think the experience that we're designing, especially within Accenture, is again, as I mentioned, designed with the humans in mind, so as to improve, hopefully, the customer experience. So whilst we are automating some parts, it doesn't mean that we're taking the human away from the entire picture, but we're still there and doing other things that could better support the business. Yeah.
Thanks, Melissa. And I think that's such a good reminder in terms of, what is your objective of digitalization? Of course, convenience, but also as you shared, it's also about the improving the customer experience. In this case, I suppose for charities, perhaps it's your volunteer engagement as well as your beneficiary engagement as well. So in the next part, a board member is concerned about whether technology is too expensive and it's just cheaper to just rely on human labor. Melissa, can you share any tips you may have on how do you approach stakeholders on cost concerns or any tips on change management?
Yes, okay. I mean, I'll be very honest, right? Technology does cost money. And when we embarked on this legal technological transformational journey, it entails significant investments. And I believe that within Accenture, I think we had to weigh the benefits versus the cons, the investments, but the end game and the outcome of what we're trying to drive in terms of be it speed to contract closure, and the analytics, which I think we'll talk a little bit about, to enable us to actually make better, smarter decisions, because with the data, we're able to know where the risk points are, I'm again talking in terms of contract risk management, because with the data analytics, we're actually able to look ahead to say, okay, these are the pain points. And then when we go back into the front end, when we're trying to negotiate a contract, what are the areas we should be focusing on based on maybe when we deliver the project or the contract, we know which are the points that we have suffered or have entered into certain risks that materialize, for example. So it enables us to actually work a lot smarter, make better decisions, and also try to be more client-centric, because we could let go of things that are actually not material to us. So I think in that sense, we have to be convinced that the value that it brings would outweigh the investments. So I think that was one of the issues that we had to obviously convince the stakeholders that it was a worthwhile investment. And also, I think I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation about us as a legal team trying to constantly keep pace with the rapidly growing business. And it's almost impossible to have to grow at that same speed, right? Because, legal or lawyers are costly. So one of the cheaper ways is actually to use technology to be able to help actually take away some of the more repetitive portions of the work. And that would actually help to manage the cost in the longer run. So it's trying not to be a lot more far-sighted. There may be some initial investments, but it should reap dividends and rewards in the future. And on your second question, right, on change management, I'll be very honest as well. We constantly struggle with that, because change management, everyone is always used to, if you're very used to the manual ways of working and found that that's worked for you, it's difficult to shift. And it's a lot of mindset change. And we also had to sort of remind our teams when we embarked on this transformational journey, why are we doing it? What are the benefits as to what it will entail? And obviously, it may take time for people to adapt, time for people to learn the technology, the platform. And so that's one of the things we had to convince people of the benefits that ultimately will benefit them, because you're going to end up freeing your time from more boring menial tasks to doing more interesting, engaging work. And secondly, I think we also tried to focus on the user experience, because we took in and we're constantly taking on the user feedback to see, okay, where are the pain points? What are the issues that is making it hard for you to adopt technology? I mean, I think Huilin has been working with me quite a bit on this, in terms of the sometimes the system is a bit slow, there were a lot of bugs, things would hang, and I think we escalated that, try and find ways to address that. Also, data entry was a troublesome point as well, and we tried to work on it by getting additional help and support. So I think those are the areas that pointers that we use to try and help with change management.
Thanks, Melissa. A gentle reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them through Pigeonhole. I believe the link for Pigeonhole should be found in the Zoom chat. In our next scenario, Chris manages, finally, to digitalize food charities records and create mailing lists. With this data, Chris wants to ask a volunteer to help analyze the profile of the beneficiaries so that he can better tailor food charities programs. Eugene, are there any legal concerns for Chris to do data analytics on the data that he has collected?
I mean, for this, we'll look again at personal data because we have the PEPA over that sits on top of us. Most important, I guess you need to get consent. So whoever gives the data to you, you just need to make sure that you get their consent. And it could be just be a simple line, in the list of purposes you have in the beneficiary form, and that can be done. There may be certain exceptions available, but I think for their actions, so if that things go wrong with them, you will be held liable. So you need to be very, very careful with who you select to be a data intermediary. And sorry, this is one of the things which, if things go wrong, what the commission will assess is how do you select your data intermediary. I mean, it really doesn't work if you tell them, oh, I just choose the cheapest. There must be a certain process and certain reason why you select them. And contractually, you try to impose certain controls onto them so that they will protect data, and you yourself can discharge your obligation to put in reasonable security requirements on your personal data. Yeah.
Thanks, Eugene. That's interesting to know that actually the charity actually is responsible not only for its employee, but also for its volunteers as well. Huilin, are there any particular tools that Accenture uses to help them with data analytics?
Well, in terms of our tools, we do have we've run through a little bit of a summary of our in-house platforms, but I think maybe to reframe the question, I think for data analytics, we try to think about the purposes for which we want to run the data analytics. And then for us, in terms of contracting, I think actually Melissa has also summed it up quite well in the earlier question. We're looking to understand, a particular client's, contracting culture, as well as try to understand the usual key risk that comes out for each client, and then try to understand so that we can make it more efficient when we do contracting with a particular client, that if we're always seeing the same few kind of risks coming out for that, and that's borne out by the data analysis and the sort of like the history of the contracts that we've seen, then and how that has panned out practically, right? If that's already been sufficiently mitigated operationally, then perhaps in sort of like the new deals that we have with the same client, we may not need to rehash that discussion. And maybe some of these reasons are things that we can, take on board from the get-go, and then sort of like free up our folks' time to sort of concentrate more on delivering a better project outcome for them.
Thanks, Huilin. Melissa, do you have anything to add?
Well, that's based on what Huilin has shared. That's how we have leveraged data analytics within our contracting space. But we also provide, as part of our services, data analytics services to clients. And one of the key things that from a legal perspective, we are constantly partnering and supporting the business on is to ensure that the use of such analytics and technology is used in a responsible way, actually, because the ability to use or potentially misuse with these software analytics tools is there. And whilst the initial intent could be right, there is that potential that, especially if you're handling personal data, and the case of the charities, right, you could be handling a lot of personal data as well. And so I think that's something that we have to think about when using technology, whether or not it's used in a correct way and for a correct purpose, or whether or not that's the original intent, but could it be actually extended beyond its original purpose? And so we do need to be quite careful when it comes to such technology, and especially with regards to the purpose. So that's something that we are very cautious about when it comes to leveraging such analytics tools. Yeah.
Thanks, Melissa. And, I think that resonates with me in terms of, although you may start with the right intentions, but it's good to keep checking in terms of whether you're working within that parameters, especially when you're dealing with beneficiaries who sometimes perhaps may have little choice in terms of sharing the amount of personal data so that they can receive help and services from the charities. So in the next part, a sponsor approaches food charity. They offer to donate money to food charity if food charity shares the contact list of their volunteers. Eugene, what are your thoughts on this situation?
Find another sponsor.
Short and sweet, but to the point.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, okay, so you can do it if you really, really want to. I mean, try to get consent, you try to put in certain safeguards in place. But very practically, if you look at whoever signs up your volunteer forms and the volunteer says that, as part of signing up, I can sell your personal data to someone else. Not the most attractive proposition, I would say, to attract volunteers.
Thanks, Eugene. Your volunteers are precious. I think what Eugene's trying to get at is, think about long term, maybe short term, sure, you might earn a bit, or most volunteers would not even agree to selling their personal data. So try to have a more long term vision. So what happens if, maybe you look at it another way instead of providing the contact list? So instead, food charity emails and advertisement instead to the volunteers through the contact list. So is that a more feasible option from a legal perspective, Eugene?
I mean, it's a bit unusual. You can ask for consent. It's more common it's called third-party marketing. So you say you buy certain products A, and they'll tell you that, hey, we can also tell you, you can consent to us telling you about products which may be of interest to you, related products. So if you buy milk powder, they'll recommend you a Prem, for example, a Prem. So I guess the analogy is similar here. I mean, if you volunteer, then I can, I will say that, I can also email stuff about my sponsors to you. You can get consent for those. But again, I mean, it kind of makes the terms a bit more unusual. As a volunteer, you'll be thinking, what am I signing up for?
Thanks, Eugene. And again, reminds me of sometimes I do see certain forms where they allow you to tick boxes if you want to hear from partners or marketing material. So I think, is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, so partners. So that means there's certain requirements. Also things like, the PDPC suggests that if you consent to marketing, you try and get consent for marketing stuff. For emails, you should get clear positive assent. If you're calling them, SMS, phone, so this will be a do not call regime. So it's a telemarketing thing where you need to get clear and ambiguous consent, you need to check the registry. So there are more things involved. Makes your life a bit more complicated if you want to do all this stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So sorry for this, but I think just now we had a slight technical glitch in terms of your explanation about the PDPA when it comes to I think when it comes to basically sharing the contact list of the volunteers to the sponsors. So is it in short basically no, you cannot share the contact list unless the volunteers agree to it?
Yeah, we strongly discourage you from doing it. I mean, you need to think about what kind of sponsor asks you for this kind of data. So who will you be associated with? I mean, do you make yourself attractive to volunteers? And then with all that in place, then if you really want to go ahead, I mean, possibly yes, you can do it. You get consent. You try and put in certain safeguards in place. But really, do you want to go down that route actually?
Thanks, Eugene. Well, we have come to our Q&A segment. And to our audience, if you have any questions, please submit them through the Pigeonhole link, which you can find in the chat box. So let me go to the first interesting question, and it's on cyber incident insurance. So I think everyone's listening about, okay, I think basically, Eugene, what you mentioned about, you're responsible for your employees, your volunteers, and perhaps even third parties. So do you think for charity to take up cyber incident insurance, is that advisable for this particular audience member? They hear it's a bit difficult to claim if there's a breach because very often the cause of the breach may not lie with the charity.
Yeah, okay. So cybersecurity insurance, I mean, that is a bit of a different animal. I mean, one is you need to be able to justify paying the premiums. And typically how the process works, if you decide to go for it, is that the security provider, the insurance provider will ask you for certain, try to understand your IT, your security requirements, what kind of vendors you work for, what kind of security requirements you have in place. With that in mind, I mean, they'll price in the risk for you. So that's where your premium is calculated. They will put in certain requirements like, oh, if you change certain things, you need to tell us. You can only use certain providers. And before you do certain things, it needs to go through us. So there's a lot of administrative things to put in place. So the question actually is, what is the size of your business? Can you tell yourself that yes, my business is large enough, my operations are large enough that I can justify going down this route? Yeah, so it's more of a risk allocation and pricing thing to think about. Yeah.
Thanks, Eugene. And perhaps, as you mentioned, it's a risk allocation. It doesn't eliminate the risk. It's just risk allocation. So perhaps maybe more effective to look into your processes to reduce the risk of a cybersecurity attack happening in the first place. So a question from audience member is, talking about tech integration, and I guess this is for Huilin and Melissa. Any thoughts on how long does it typically take to implement a suitable tech integration? So maybe perhaps in a more general sense, whenever you roll out a new initiative, how long typically does it take you? Weeks? I don't think days, but how long does you think it typically takes?
I think it takes a while actually, and a pretty long time because firstly, I think we had to, if we think back on our origination process, we had to sort of, with the selection of the appropriate platform and vendor. And then I think in order to see whether or not the right platform addresses our needs. So, and then I think there are further customizations in terms of what needs to be done in order to adapt the technology to what functionalities are required from our end. And so I think the whole process was quite a long process, to be really honest. And it went through multiple reiterations as well in order to get to where we are today. And even today, we're still constantly trying to reiterate, adding new functionalities, modifying some existing functionalities. And I think it's what we call a pretty agile process. And to answer that question, I think it's not a short journey. And I think it spans across a year or so. So I think it took, and also it really depends because the size of our company and it's quite large. So I think in order to have a platform that actually supports the scale and into upon which what we're looking at to support our business is something quite massive. So it may vary from company to company or scenario to scenario. Yeah.
Thanks. So perhaps if you have a smaller charity, ironically, you actually might be more nimble if you have fewer
Possibly. And maybe you could get something that's
departments.
off the shelf. Yeah, probably.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, I think also because as you rightly pointed out, I think for Accenture, the tools that you share are quite sophisticated, very high tech, definitely very suitable for the large scale of, I think you mentioned about 700,000 employees worldwide. But for a charity, you may not need to go all the way. You might be meeting your purposes with, simpler tools, which does not have to be so customizable. So we received a question about, we were touching about PDPA, we were touching about emailing lists. Now, how about Telegram? So let's say if they agree that you can contact people through Telegram, so does the PDPA control what kind of messages you post in Telegram? Can you post anything you like in the Telegram group if you add volunteers to it? Eugene?
Okay. So a few things, right? So PDPA, you have this do not call registry. So that is the non-telemarketing thing. So if you haven't signed up, I think you should sign up, put your name there. So the rule is that whoever needs to send marketing messages by voice, fax, or SMS, you need to check the registry, and if the name is not there, only then could you send. The exception is that if you have received clear and ambiguous consent. So Telegram, WhatsApp, I mean, they fall within the scope of the SMS type messages. So if you want to send marketing messages through your Telegram, the answer is you need to get clear and ambiguous consent, and you need to check the list, or if not, get clear and ambiguous consent. So with Telegram groups, I know it's very common. I mean, we have those WhatsApp, Telegram groups with employees. So then the question is actually how much liability do you have in a Telegram or in a WhatsApp chat? So one of the more common examples that I'll bring up, that there's this PDPA case where a former employee, so the employee, there's an employee chat group and everyone was talking. So the employee quit, and then before she left, she scolded management like, "Oh, you're terrible, terrible management. Why you sack me?" And so management said, no, because you're a terrible person. This is why, this is why. And the ex-employee actually complained to the PPC, and she won. And the reason is because personal data was disclosed in the instant messaging chat, and management was replying in the context of management, like in representing the company. So the company got in trouble. So this is it's quite common. So when you go on instant messaging chats, all this, be really, really careful. And try not to really deal with personal data.
Thanks. And I think that's a good reminder for WhatsApp groups, I think, in particular, because Telegram tends to be a bit more one way. But if it's a WhatsApp group, be mindful, because it's not only the charity, but you also have your volunteers or whoever's in the WhatsApp group that's able to post messages. So I think more importantly, it's more of getting inspiration in terms of the possibilities, opening your mind towards what is different approaches you might want to take towards your digitalization journey. So the next question for Eugene, slight confusion between what's ETA and what's Evidence Act. I mean, what's the difference between both of them and how they complement each other?
Okay, so there is basically two different statutes. ETA is Electronic Transactions Act. So the purpose of the act, is really to help Singapore as a whole digitalize, go electronic. So it's called Electronic Transactions Act. So it supports, it facilitates transactions, record keeping, going online. So it recognizes electronic records per se, right? Evidence Act is ancient. I mean, it's been around since the 19th century kind of thing. So basically, it's stuff that if the court wants to bring to evidence, go to court. So that's evidence. So what does the court think about? So electronic records, one of the things you need to think about, because touch wood, say there's a litigation, a former employee comes after you. How can you say, look, this is the evidence that I have. This is, say, the employment agreement that I have, but it's now digitalized because I threw away the hard copy. So all that, is up for disputes. And there are certain rules now, because, we are moving to the 21st century, that deals with electronic records, presumptions that help you prove or help the court understand, okay, maybe there's not such a big problem here. And it's up to the other side to disprove that, hey, no, something's wrong with the record. So it's very helpful to put all this together and you think about your own digitalization policies and how you can take advantage of all these little things so that touch wood, if something happens, you're in good hands. It really saves a lot of the hassle.
Thanks, Eugene. You mentioned about electronic signatures, and internally, so for this particular audience member, internally everybody knows who's signing in terms of the organization. But question mark, do third parties like banks or lawyers or police recognize electronic signatures?
So the question is, okay, it depends. It again goes back to it really depends. Say you transact with a bank. So the bank will be able to understand, evaluate, okay, risk for this type of transactions, can we afford to go electronic? If the answer is no, then it's up to them and they would ask you, hey, can we sign hard copy instead, right? So to come to the assessment, I think what's important is what are you signing up? If you are signing up, let's say $100 million loan, maybe think about it. So that's why on the real life, so when you open an account with a bank, almost always they'll ask you to sign a hard copy document. That's the account opening statement. Stuff are following on, that can be electronic. And one of the reasons for that is that it helps the bank take advantage of certain presumptions under the Electronic Transactions Act. So if you agree on a commercially agreed on a commercially reasonable security procedure, so a hard copy, and you agree on, okay, look, hard copy plus 2FA and all that stuff. All that will support that is a commercially reasonable procedure, and the bank can take certain presumptions at the relevant time if you raise a dispute as to authenticity, of the document or whether I signed it or not. Yeah. So it's very, very helpful. All these things you need to take into account. So vice versa, if you're the guy who's trying to put in place a signing mechanism, these are things to think about. And hopefully you can take advantage of this and reduce the chances of dispute.
Thanks, Eugene. A couple of questions for Accenture, and I'll just group it into one. And I think the underlying concern is that some charities have started on their digitalization journey. However, they're having perhaps roadblocks. For example, the board is super supportive, but perhaps the staff or on the ground may not be as supportive, and the solution may have become a white elephant. So I guess the question is, any tips on how do you try and get stakeholder buy-in towards trying to implement a digital solution?
Okay, so I think it's something that we empathize, because our digitization journey was not without hiccups as well. And as I think I mentioned earlier when I spoke about the change management, it's something that we continue to work on. And I think it also is, I think if it's a top-down direction, we also need to take a step back whilst we can sort of mandate, which we've gone down that path as well, to mandate that the users actually go about in using that. But I think it takes more than that, because, we are looking at sometimes really changing the way people think and work. And so it requires a shift in their mindset, as I mentioned as well. So what we did was we did a lot of listening sessions to really find out, okay, why is it that you are hesitant about using it? And we really listened with our hearts, obviously, and we tried to address, if it takes up too much time, what can we do to help you? We also took back their feedback and used the opportunity to streamline, improve some of the technology that was giving issues. So I think that's what we tried to do. And then we constantly reminded folks that of the end game, which is the benefits really, because ultimately it will make your lives a lot easier with the analytics that presents itself. But we do need to slowly shift and pivot. So I think it takes a lot of encouragement. Everyone, Huilin, myself, and a lot of the management team trying to constantly encourage, remind the users on the ground. And, I think change just requires a bit of time. Even the business users who needed to use the system to sort of request for legal support, everyone was just so used to picking up the phone to call or just emailing, which is the default, right? And you tell them to go log in with the system. It takes a while, and we say, we're not going to help you unless you do that. We had to use different ways to try and motivate and encourage people to use the technology. Otherwise, as you say, it will become a white elephant. Yeah, not sure whether you have anything else to add. Right. Yeah.
Thanks, Melissa. And I think important point you raised, about refining. It wasn't so much that you found one solution and it's just there, but you really took feedback from the ground and you really tried to tweak it to address everyone's concerns so that it doesn't become a white elephant. Well, we've come to the end of our Q&A session, but we would like to invite each panelist to share with our audience members a single takeaway, just a single takeaway, so that, if everything flew by, what is one takeaway that you think you'd like the audience to take away with them from this webinar? Perhaps I'll start with Eugene.
Me too, right?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay,
You can
well,
go on.
one is, of course, risk, right? Risk. My job is to tell you risk and tell you all the bad things that can happen. So, looking at the perspective, if you want to do something, I think it's very important to understand your risk profile. If you're doing something funky, look at your compliance compliance, like personal data is very, very important, and there's a lot of emphasis on that. So that is risk part. I guess the good thing, I guess the very, very good thing is, we have a lot of grants in Singapore for various electronic digital efforts. So before you do anything, please go and check whether there are grants. Government's giving out grants. Please go and try and take as much as you can if you qualify. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's a very good point, Eugene.
Right. And then I think for myself, I think when we are talking about, embarking on a digital transformation journey, I think you may have a specific, scenario or pain point that you wish to address, but I think also at the same time, take a step back to sort of map out, at a broader organizational level, what the future vision might be as well. So that, as you have that, sort of a bird's eye view in mind as well, I think it would help you in, moving forward with incremental improvements as well, rather than just addressing a specific scenario at a point in time.
Thanks, Huilin.
I think for me, it would be hopefully motivational, inspirational to share that our journey is one where we are able to use different types of technology to solve for some of the business issues that we face internally, and hopefully encourage each and every one of you to be able to open your minds, to open your minds to the potential of technology where it can be leveraged for the good of your business or your charity. Yeah.
Thanks, Melissa. This brings our webinar to an end. And after this webinar ends, a feedback form will pop up on your browser for your completion. We appreciate your feedback so that we can improve our future webinars. If your charity needs legal advice, please email us at assistnpos@lawsocprobono.org.sg. On behalf of Law Society Pro Bono Services, we would like to thank our speakers again. And thank you to our audience members for joining us, and we hope that you have a great week ahead.